Well, greetings all my Patreon members. It's great to have you with me. So today I have with me an English iconographer who is in fact living in Italy. I'll introduce you to him in a minute, or let him describe his wonderful life, Ian Knowles. So Ian, as you'll tell us, taught quite a bit in Bethlehem. So being immersed in that whole Palestinian culture, he came to think that perhaps these great masterpieces we see in places like St. Catherine's and Mount Sinai, that previous art historians have thought, well, must have been done in Constantinople. Um, he's questioning this, and he thinks that, as you'll describe in more detail, all the elements were there in, say, 6th, 7th century Palestine to make great works of art. So, and this isn't just an historical thing. I think it's a great interest that, first of all, we can't assume that what historians have said about a period is the last word. Like, for example, the Dark Ages. That term Dark Ages, we assume, therefore, that because all these important historians said this was a dark period, there's nothing of value there. But more recently, especially as the liturgical art has experienced a revival, we realized, in fact, the Renaissance can be called a dark period. And this earlier period is a rich period, a period full of great light. So I think what Ian has to tell us will challenge some accepted art historical evaluations. But also some of these principles of what produced these great works of art was the synthesis of different cultures crossing together. And this is really apt for our so-called postmodern age, where through reproductions in books, travel, etc., we're perhaps overexposed to many different cultures. So what do we do with this? Do we sort of make a smorgasbord and hope for the best? Or is there an intelligent way of taking the best of these cultures and making something that's still unified and not a pastiche? So Ian, great to meet you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be an iconographer, and particularly your background in Bethlehem?
Yeah, well, thanks, Aidan, for the invitation.
Pleasure.
I live here in the north of Italy, in the Alps, very much sort of off the beaten track these days. So it's nice that somebody wants to hear what I might actually want to say. If it's so, I appreciate being asked. It's a nice change. Yes, I've been an iconographer. Well, I started dabbling with icons when I was 18. Stumbled across icons in an Orthodox church in Athens and was transfigured by it, really, that presence of God there. I was an Anglican at that point. I'm a Catholic now. And I studied theology at Oxford University and various other places. So my faith is very important to me, and it's something which my iconography has enabled me to really explore, and not as an idea, but as a sort of living reality in a context. So I'd say really that iconography has saved my faith at various times, because it's so tangible and real, and not pliable to my subconscious and stuff. It's there, you know, what you've done, and you remember the experience of painting the face of Christ or the angels or the Blessed Mother, whoever it might be. So iconography is not just something I'm interested in. It's very much my life, really, and my spiritual life. It's very much tied in with it. As you say, I did spend quite a lot of time, over 10 years, in Bethlehem.
That lied. Good, I hadn't realized it was so
Yes.
long.
Yeah, over 10 years. Set up an icon school there. And there are now 3 little workshops of people that I taught, which is nice. And I think living in Bethlehem, which is on the other side of the separation wall, I think everybody's aware at the moment of the tension between Palestinians and Israelis, with what's going on in Gaza and so forth. Living in that context was challenging on many different levels. and not least because you're living in a holy land,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that matters to just about every person on the face of the earth who believes in God in some way, whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or even Hindu. The events that took place in this tiny pocket of land have tremendous significance, and of course, where people are invested with their deepest emotions, then fights break out. So it was quite a profound experience living there, and not on the Israeli side, but on the Palestinian side. Brought a particular perspective, and among the Christian communities whose origins go back to the time of the apostles. That's the continuous presence from biblical times through till now. So that's quite a rich experience living in the middle of that.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ian, for introducing your life to us. Could you perhaps put us in the picture a bit? We're talking particularly now about the source of inspiration for a lot of the, let's call it Middle Eastern art. So we're talking about art from St. Catherine's, the little that remains really in the Holy Land, because so much was destroyed. I was with Ian, was it 3 years ago or something, and they just finished restoring, cleaning the mosaics in the Basilica at Bethlehem, and the scaffolding was still up, so I was able to see closely. That was done in the 12th century or 13th, the Basilican mosaics. 12th, yeah. Yeah, and yeah, it's very interesting that. And so, could you talk to us a bit about your theories, your thoughts about how a lot of this great art could have actually been produced within rather than imported from without, and what makes you think this? What were the ingredients that made this high culture available? Obviously, a high spiritual life, but also the skill set of the iconographers, be they painters or mosaicists. Could you summarize for us your theory on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, literally, I just stumbled across it. I think many of your listeners are going to have been on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And I think 99% of those who go to get to the footsteps of Jesus. We're trying to dig through all those layers of history and get back to the real moment when our Savior was on Mount Calvary, when he was born in the stable in Bethlehem. And a lot of people sort of feel really disappointed because actually there's all these layers of devotion which have grown up over all these centuries. And if you go around Jerusalem, for example, if you go to St. Anne's Church, there's quite an extensive excavation by the Pool of Siloam. And if you know, people, oh, that's nice, bit of old bit of rocks and all that sort of, you know, stones and this sort of stuff. But that's the pool where Jesus was, so they're all scrambling down. But actually, the Holy Land is holy because of a continuing presence of Christ, and that presence is liturgical. The Holy Sepulchre, where day and night services continue as they have done for almost 2,000 years. And that's pretty awe-inspiring in itself, you know, this continual sense of the living presence of Christ, recognized, adored, worshipped, prayed to, beseeched, wailed at, whatever it might be, but a real living presence which matters to people. If you go to St. Peter in Gallicante, which is just outside the current walls of the old city of Jerusalem, there's a model of Byzantine Jerusalem.
So what period are we talking of there? Sort of 6th century?
The Byzantine city, really from the 4th century. And one of the things I think most people are not aware of is that the city walls that you see now, okay, most of them have been, as it were, rebuilt and stuff by Saladin and the Arabs and the Crusaders and so forth. But that city, that footprint, is centered on the Holy Sepulchre.
Mm.
The Jewish city was on Mount Zion, which, if you go to David's tomb and the Church of the Dormition, that area there is actually outside of those walls.
Mm. Mm.
So the city basically shifted.
Mm.
And basically in the 4th century onwards, you get literally hundreds of thousands, millions of pilgrims coming to visit the holy places. And we actually have some of their notebooks. Egeria, I think, is one of the most famous. Yes. And you see there how Christians literally from all over the Roman world made their way to the holy places, and especially to the holy city.
Mm.
And coming there, they then settled around the Holy Sepulchre. You want to be close to the action, close to the holiest parts, monasteries and so forth. But some pilgrims never went home. Some of them joined monasteries, but some of them just set up businesses, trading and this sort of stuff. And during the period from the 4th to the 6th century, this area that we call Palestine, Israel, the Holy Land, was the most densely populated part of the Roman Empire.
Right.
Apart from the area of Constantinople and just down towards Ephesus on the western fringe of what we call Turkey. It was that important.
Right.
Now, that itself gives you a clue that maybe we've not really understood the importance of Palestine as a Roman province to the early Byzantine period.
If I may do a little plug here, I'll just get the book for you. In my research for this book, and I had in mind our conversations. In this book, I look at the 14 main festal icons, or the 40 main feast, and one section of each chapter is on the development of the festal icon. And again, I return to Palestine because these feasts celebrate an event that happened in the Holy Land, inevitably. So often the first church dedicated to that feast was there. When you have a dedication, you have a celebration each year of that feast. So you need an icon, you need an image. So therefore, many of the earliest images we have seem to have come from the Holy Land, often in terms of ampulla. When you went as a holy pilgrim, a holy tourist, let's say, you wanted something to take back with you. So these lead or ceramic containers with holy oil or holy water from the site had on them a relief image of that.
Exactly.
And these would be taken all over the world.
So
what started there was spread around. Sometimes perhaps ideas came into Jerusalem, but also came out.
One of the things that you pick up in your book, and I think it's really important, is the consistency of our iconography today with some of these very early prototype images, as the church began to sort of spontaneously express its faith in a visual form.
Yes.
And the situation in the Holy Land, it wasn't that it was a backwater. There's a sort of narrative that we've been taught in the West, which is, the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans in AD 70 and then 130.
That's the end of the Holy Land.
Exactly. And then, it was like that until 1948 and then State of Israel. In fact, the most prolific, creative, economically viable, most populated period until the modern era was the Byzantine Holy Land. So before the Arab conquest, in the early 7th century, from about the 5th century, it was a place humming with life. And it was these pilgrims
Mm.
who were taking away all these little knickknacks. And, you can imagine pious ladies, sort of biting bits of the true cross as they reverence it, so they could take a little bit of the true cross back with them. Or, hacking away at a pillar that was associated with something of our Lord's life, because people have a natural affinity to the physicality of our faith. We want a little bit to take back with us.
And not only the Holy Land, but in the life of, I think it's Saint Simeon the Stylite. A stylite is someone who lives on a pillar. And this life was written very soon after he died, so it's sort of accurate. He said that people come from all over the known world to see him, and mentions countries and includes Britain.
Yep.
And we don't know if they came from Britain to see him. They may have just been on a trading boat and heard about the strange man on a pillar, so went to see him. But we do have ampullae of St. Simeon the Stylite in Britain. So we know that one way or the other, people have seen him and came back with these holy secondary relics, let's call them. There's an interesting book called Saint Settlement and Seaways, and it's saying that after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, roads no longer became the safest, most efficient form of transport. But seaways did.
Yeah.
And this tremendous movement, backwards and forwards along the ocean. So this idea of the isolated Middle Ages and Dark Ages is really
and in
long.
fact, I know there's been excavations done in Glastonbury, which is associated with the legend of the visit of Joseph of Arimathea and even Jesus as a child. Yes. But they've found Phoenician pottery.
Fine. Yeah.
So there was this trade route from the Holy Land directly to Glastonbury.
And even as far north as Whitby.
Yeah.
A big archaeological dig was done there, and I've read the findings. And there was pottery, Byzantine stuff, it's just stuff from all over. Oil. Yeah. Oil. Just there's so
and I think this is really quite this is touching on a very important point, which challenges something of the earlier academic consensus about the history of Byzantium, that it was just the city of Constantinople that was of any note. That was true probably in the 11th century, before the sack of Constantinople by the Crusaders. During that period, it became this jewel, but that was partly because all the relics from Jerusalem after the fall of Jerusalem to the Arabs, all the relics got pinched and taken over to Constantinople. So that became like the new Jerusalem.
All right, but before that, the relics were in the Holy
Land, in the original places.
Yeah.
So the part of our lazy thinking over the centuries has been to say, oh, well, everything was in Constantinople. Palestine, there wasn't really anything there anyway. So what do we need to think about? And even when you go to the Holy Land, and this is what I saw for myself, people aren't looking at what's there. They're looking at what they want to be there.
Yes. Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about Alexandria? Because Alexandria was just the intellectual powerhouse, really. I mean, Constantinople didn't have great centers of learning. Alexandria did.
Well, in fact,
because you've obviously got the rich monasticism starting in Egypt, so you've got this incredibly powerful spiritual life. But you might say, well, what about the intellectual capacity? Well, Alexandria was like the University of the Mediterranean.
Well, we've got to be a bit careful on that as well, because if you think of the theological controversies that come up time and time again, dividing the Christian world, we talk about Antioch and Alexandria. These are two theological powerhouses, intellectual powerhouses in that early period of the church's history.
For those who don't know, could you tell us the periods where they're sort of vying with each other?
So we're really talking about the period of the Great Council. So beginning with the Council of Ephesus, first one?
Nicaea.
Nicaea, the first one, right through to the Seventh Ecumenical Council, and the iconoclastic controversy and all that sort of stuff. So these two places, so you've got the sort of monophysite, and look what emerges: the Copts, and the Coptic church based around Alexandria, all those Christological controversies pulling one way and the other. Interestingly, Constantinople wasn't even a patriarchate while these things were going on. It was a bishopric, but it was no theological significance whatsoever, or monastic. Its monastic eminence only came after the fall of the Holy Land. Again, why? Because monasticism as a center very rapidly moved from Egypt to Palestine, St. Saba. The monastery of St. Saba is still there today, just outside Bethlehem. And the relics were pinched by the Crusaders, but in a great ecumenical gesture under Paul VI, they were returned to the monastery. So you've got this immersion of the Holy Land, not just in terms of pilgrimage, but in terms of intellect. Think of Eusebius, the great church historian of Caesarea. Gaza, the city that's being bombed to smithereens now, was a great center of learning, and there are great Christian saints there and teaching, because it's half on the road between Antioch and Alexandria. So the Holy Land is the place where everybody was coming backwards and forwards, not just on pilgrimage, but their monastic journey, their intellectual journey. It was the spiritual hub of the entire Roman world during that.
And even going back to
period.
pre-Christian times, any philosopher worth his name in Greece would go to study in Egypt.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, they'll go there to study. I'm pretty certain that Plato did, and so that was a real philosophical center, and
certainly had the great library.
Yeah, well, the Alexandrian Library is incredible. Yeah.
But
okay,
more important for us is that Alexandria was the artistic center of the Roman world. I came across that in this very interesting book, which you showed me first of all, which talks about the emergence of the early icons. And reading through it, he said, Alexandria was the artistic place par excellence of the Roman world. So it's not just the Fayum portraits that we're looking at in terms of an inspiration for iconography, which of course is right next to the Holy Land, but Alexandria is this place of excellence. It's literally just down the coast. It's a day's journey by boat at most. So you've got the Holy Land is really a confluence of theological, spiritual, artistic excellence. And if you think in terms of the Holy Land as a hub of trade, Caesarea has they're still there today, vast warehouses from that Byzantine period, because all the trade was coming now to Constantinople. I'll just bring a map up just to help people understand what I mean. This is to illustrate what happens when the capital moves from Rome to Constantinople. If you look at the distance from Rome to Antioch and Alexandria, it's a long journey. But from Constantinople, it's really quite close. And in terms of the Holy Land, that's also true. So suddenly, instead of being a fringe province, which it was under, when Rome was the capital, it suddenly becomes really close. And Caesarea, which is just along on the coast, just north of where it says Jerusalem, was a main trading artery from the east. So silks, pigments, spices, they were all coming either through the desert up from Aqaba down here, or across the desert from Arabia, all passing through. Now, we know where there's trade, there's money. And so you might not be there because you're full of devotion to the holy places, but you're certainly there because you think there's money to be made. And so this, I think, really a confluence of different elements. Mean that for a very small period of about 200 years.
And for any rich art, you need this variety of ingredients, don't you? The intellectual, the spiritual, the artistic tradition to draw on, as it were, giving you a vocabulary to adapt. money.
Yeah,
It's all there, isn't it?
exactly. Now, then you put the special ingredient in liturgy,
Mm,
liturgical art. Where is the liturgical epicenter of the
mm,
Roman world? The
mm,
Holy Sepulchre, the Basilica of the Nativity,
yeah.
the place of the Ascension. That, Cyril of Jerusalem, all the great developments in terms of the liturgy were all happening in the Holy Land.
I think the great
Um,
challenge when I was researching for my book, Festal Icons, was finding evidence of early Holy Land art. So there are written descriptions, often
mhm,
written descriptions of mosaics, which are no longer extant. Um, the Ampelai collection of Monza is really important.
yeah.
This collection was given to this monastery in Italy, and that's why we have so many of them all in one place.
Mm,
So we've got sort of tips of the iceberg here and there, but some sort of imaginative scholarly work got to be undertaken to sort of read in the gaps, as it were, because of the terrible
yeah.
wars there and the Islamic invasion, all sorts of things. Most of the riches there are destroyed, but there are enough things to indicate just the architecture. Like
Mm,
um, I know it's not the Holy Land as such, but around Saint Simeon's pillar was built an
mm,
incredible church, and the skill with which that
mm,
church was made out of dry stone blocks, basically, to so precisely cut
mm,
a level of skill. And it's a very particular architecture. It's not
yeah.
just sort of brought in lock, stock, and barrel from Constantinople. A very specific architecture unique to that area. But the level of skill is just so high. But you can pull down a church, but you can see the bits and pieces
Yeah.
lying around. You can recreate it
And
even
of
on a
course, one of the
computer.
things that
So
we
that's our
actually
challenge,
do
isn't it? It's just getting
have,
the raw material to show that this is true, that there was a lot of incredible stuff created there, not just
e-
brought in.
exactly. And of course, we have one place which is intact and has half of the surviving panel icons in the world, and that's St.
St.
Catherine's.
Catherine, exactly, yeah.
And St. Catherine's is part of the Holy Land. We tend to think it's Egypt, but actually it's under the Jerusalem Patriarchate.
Yes, it's a good point. Mm.
And it was very much part of Palestine at that period. So when you look at that little capsule, which hasn't been ravaged by earthquakes or fire or warfare or iconoclasm and all that sort of, what do we have? That wonderful mosaic of the
Mm.
Transfiguration. And I mean, maybe it's a bit of sort of wishful thinking, but if you think this is the place of that first theophany at the burning bush, and then the theophany to Elijah, what about if that was the place where iconography really came to birth?
Mm.
Liturgical art that encapsulated transfigured reality.
Mm.
So,
Well, that mosaic is a breakthrough in the sense that earlier Christian art tended to be more beholden to classical narrative,
mhm,
whereas they've left a lot out, and it's
yeah,
a real encounter. It's just a raw encounter with the
mm,
Transfiguration. You're not doing a glorified comic picture about this event.
yeah,
You're actually encountering it, and there they've really skillfully left things out and emphasized things. And I've been there recently to the Holy Land and seen that.
yes,
Incredible work. It's an apps that embraces you, but what has been left out makes it so much
mm,
more powerful than if it were more in the classical illuminated manuscript, where you get all these sort of
yeah,
details and background and
mm,
trees and rocks and mountains and that. So I think that was a real breakthrough, or if it wasn't the big breakthrough, it was part of
yes,
quite a concentrated period where they realized actually we're not just depicting a past event. This mosaic, this work of liturgical art, is a portal such that those who pray in this building viewing this actually have an encounter and be
mm.
transfigured themselves. They're not just
And what I
remembering a
think is
past event.
really wonderful, because one, we've got the name of the
Yeah.
people who designed it there, the abbot and one of the monks.
Mm.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Secondly,
Longinus, isn't it? And another theatre's name.
the way the original building was constructed, its architecture, they put this false roof in now, but actually take that roof out, and above it is the window.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when the sun rises,
Right.
the light pours through. So the monks, every morning as they gathered to pray on this place where Moses, the bush is on the other side of that wall, burning bush, in that spot, there where the theophany took place, where Moses saw God in this transfigured way, and where Elijah, just up on above the mountain, heard the silent presence of God. Here they are in the same place, and as the light rises and they pray,
well, that's flooding them.
And when did Moses and Elijah appear with Christ? The Transfiguration.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
So when you think about only the monks there could have come up with that.
Yeah, good point.
It's a natural. Once that you say it, it's so obvious, but it encapsulates everything that they're living for. So that image was embodying a lived, profound, ascetical journey.
They were depicting not just a past event, but their own experience of the Transfiguration. And I think that's it, isn't it? Liturgical art. It's got to come out of a lived experience. So you're actually depicting something you've experienced yourself. And I've noticed this with portraits. You can always tell a portrait if it's done off a photograph from one where it's done from life. Because when you're depicting someone from life, consciously, unconsciously, that person's personality, character impinges on you as you sculpt or paint the person. So you more naturally emphasize, leave things out to be more realistic, to bring out the character of that person. So these monks, they're experiencing the Transfiguration through the ascetic life, but being so close to these places where Moses and Elijah were. Yeah, they're the ones. And who actually made it? Was it someone who'd learned the trade there? It's an interesting book written on mosaic by Elizabeth, it'll come to me. She's really keen, apart from the history, on describing the origin of glass and where the raw glass came from and the making of the mosaics. And there were only two places at that time where raw glass was made. And then these lumps would be taken out to other places, and then it was melted and turned into the smelting. But the actual origin of the glass was in that sort of rough area. At that stage, you needed not just good sand, but also what's it called? Nitrium. It's a sort of it's a thing. It's a flux. It acts as a flux, which lowers the melting point of sand, and you needed these two. To melt sand requires incredible temperature, so you can't do it. But adding this other thing in, nitrate, it lowers the melting temperature. Later on, Rome discovered that you can use the alkaline from ashes. So mixing these ashes in, you can lower. So then glass started to be made elsewhere. So all the ingredients were there actually to make the tesserae. And from what you're saying, probably the skill and certainly the spiritual
the skill.
acumen.
Definitely. I mean,
and the texture was all there to make it.
For example, there are this fantastic Roman Byzantine town, and they've sort of half excavated it. It's a bit shabby, but it's wonderful because of that. It's not sort of all pristinely presented. You get a real feel. This is just one little town, and it's this is Madaba. This is in Jordan.
Oh, right,
so part of Rome, Byzantine Palestine. The quality of the mosaics is phenomenal. They're just delightful. And that's just one tiny little town. Now, if you actually think that during that period, the monasteries have mosaics on their threshing floor. I mean, talk about an indulgence. It's like they're obviously trying to find work for people. This land where everybody was coming to, everything was passing through, people settling. There was work, and there were the people to do it, and there were the resources to do it. So it's, to me, absolutely incomprehensible to suggest that, oh, well, oh, it can't have come from there. It must have been some imperial workshop in Constantinople. Why? Because 500 years later, Constantinople is this cultural dominance, but not then.
No.
And if you put, like, going back to this one little glimpse we have in Sinai of how everything could come together. I mean, it's genius stuff. It's not fantasy. You know, the reflecting on what that place is spiritually, the people who were there, we know their names, the resources that were on hand to create that mosaic. And then you can compare that with, say, the mosaic in Ravenna of the Transfiguration. Same theme, explored with an ascetic aesthetic, but much more symbolical.
This we're talking
Not
about the
that
Pollinarian
direct
class, just outside of Ravenna.
Yeah, not that direct. And they're both dated, and they're both within 10 years of each other. So you can compare what is going on in another place. I mean, it's unique to have that sort of evidence to work on. So basically, I think what convinced me to take another look back into the Holy Land, making some presuppositions. One, there was all that was necessary for liturgical art to flower in terms of raw elements, theological, spiritual, typographical, and in terms of like the physical resources you need to produce work of great quality. Put all that together, and then you see that apse in Sinai. And then, for example, that painted box of earth that's in the Vatican Museum.
One of the Vatican now.
Yes. I mean, gorgeous.
In my book, I refer to that quite a lot. That's one of the earliest extant examples we have of festal icons.
And that's a really beautiful piece. I mean,
and from the Holy Land, of course. Just to give our listeners a context for it, it's a box with what we might call secondary relics, rocks from these different holy sites. There's a lid on top. And on top of where each box is underneath, with a bit of stone, whatever, you've got a festal icon of that particular event of that place. So this somehow ended up in the Vatican Library and Museum. So this is, I think it's 6th century, 5th century.
5th or 6th. I mean, again, one of the problems we've got to remember is, as people are dating these things, they're guessing based on the assumptions that they've brought from their wider historical picture. So if you're assuming that, well, there wasn't really very much good stuff happening in Palestine, well, this can't have, you immediately sort of, I think, restrict how you can really glimpse these moments of genius. So my suspicion is that there was far more going on far earlier than we maybe are allowing ourselves to think is possible.
No, I agree. It's so easy, isn't it, to judge the past in the light of the present. So we look at the Holy Land now, there's lots of desert and arid, politically arid, culturally reasonably arid. Monasticism is pretty low ebb. So we sort of unconsciously read back into the past. And it's difficult for us to imagine it being flourishing New York, effectively. But it was. It was a cultural epicenter in many ways.
Really, it was. And
I think, again, Byzantium is a bit of a misnomer. We tend to think because it was Greeks was the main language, that basically it was just a large Greek empire. But in fact, there were so many different cultures under a larger umbrella, but so many different cultures. And I suppose, like the Western Roman Empire, its sort of genius was to conquer, well, it wasn't a genius to conquer, but once it had conquered, it would always sort of pick up the local gods and incorporate them and find ways of making it one big empire. But in fact, it was many quite disparate cultures. Did it with power more than anything. But in the East, I think, especially once they converted, you had all these different
Yes.
elements coming together to make
Mm.
a wonderfully rich. And the different patriarchates are just sort of symbolic of that
Yeah.
diversity, and Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria,
And I
etc.
think iconography, one of the things which I did for my book, just for my own thing, was I made a little timeline of all different icons. And you know how it's almost like, oh, well, there's just icons and there's just one style. But actually, when you lay it out, you see that up until sort of Panselamos tends to have dominated, I think, the Orthodox imagination in terms of real iconography. That's the epitome of what can be achieved. But that's so late. And then you look at all these different influences and styles, and it's a jewel box of possibilities. And I think that openness, and then the lack of openness because of our particular historical situation, so we sort of shrink inside our walls, closes our eyes to the glory of what God has been doing.
For myself, my own iconography, I've been going back more and more to earlier sources to sort of break the spell of Panselemos, as it were.
Yeah.
I noticed that Father Zenon's work in the crypt and in Petersburg, the inspiration for his figures there are actually from Ravenna mosaics from the Orthodox baptistry.
Right.
He's taken these slightly more stumpy mosaic figures of the apostles, attenuated them and turned them into wall paintings. So I think we can sort of break the dominance of one school, wonderful as it is, but looking at other little hints of earlier work, and it's just like a breath of fresh air. It's a new packet of genes added to the gene pool that makes us much healthier.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as you're suggesting, go beyond just painted icons, carved, relief carving, these ampullae, the mosaics, and a lot of these unpublished as well. I've just recently rediscovered a book published in 1910 from the British Museum, and it has a lot of wonderful drawings, little bits and pieces, which I'll bring it up. Here we are. Lovely old-fashioned book.
Yep.
But lots of etchings of objects which are sort of tucked away somewhere, and lots of them ceramic ones, little things like that.
Ooh.
And it's just full of stuff. It hasn't been published since. Probably stuck away in some drawer in the bowels of the British Museum. But just looking at these, we realised just how much was happening, and a lot of this was from the Middle East, from the Holy Land.
Well, I know in the Franciscan Biblicum, the biblical studies place there, they've done a lot of archaeology. They have got masses of Byzantine stuff.
Really?
But nobody is interested.
Interesting.
Because for Christians, they want Jesus's time. So, you'll get that kind. For the Jews, they want David and the ancient Israel. Nobody is interested in the Byzantine period. So there's no money to research it, to process it, let alone to display it. And most of the research that I came across when I tried to understand the place where I was living, archaeological evidence was coming from Jewish excavations, because they had some notion that there was a bit of a palace here or something like that. Well, they never found all these things. But what they keep finding is Byzantine churches and monasteries and stuff. So, well, we've got the money, so we've got to produce something at the outcome. So they write it up. But of course, these are not Byzantine specialists. And it was quite fascinating when you read some of the actual raw reports, how it's quite obvious that they are not contextualizing the evidence, other than the most general, basic way, because that's not their field of speciality. So they can't bring that depth of understanding. So that Byzantine period is not well served. And if anybody's got $1 million out there and
I was
wants to
going to say,
invest in
any
something,
Patreon listeners, you want to
yeah,
patronize an enormous task ahead, then please.
really,
Yeah,
it would
no,
be
it's a really
great.
important thing because I think the trouble at the moment with all the news we're getting in Palestine and all this terrible war going on, we associate more and more these countries in that whole region as just being battered, and we're
Mm,
reacting to their being battered in the present, and all the time we're just trying to stay alive. But we forget the history that they
mm,
were. We've got to be positive about these places. You know, that
mm,
these were incredible places, Iraq and Iran, places like that. I mean, they were just a rich place of culture at one point. So we've got to, this is why history is so important, I think.
mm.
It stops us just reacting to the present and think,
Yeah.
actually, these places were and can be again
Mm.
real powerhouses, intellectually, culturally, artistically, whatever. So that's really important. We're going to stop there. I don't want to tire our listeners, and
Yeah.
we could go on forever. But
Oh, really?
it's
Yeah.
been really, really wonderful, Ian. So, are
Thank
you
you.
doing any more writing or research on this? I know you'll be busy with your teaching
Uh,
iconography, but or are there any directions where you can point us where someone has written about this, perhaps, or a place where you could find some
to be
academic?
honest with you, funnily enough, I have written a little tiny 77-page little pamphletty book, and I found it early on because I thought, oh, I better scratch my head and remind myself as we were going to
Mhm,
have this conversation.
mhm.
So that there is nothing
No. No.
in terms of a book that I could say, go and read this.
Mhm,
What there is are lots and lots and lots of academic papers.
mhm, mhm,
And you can get them on the internet. You just do a sort of search, say Byzantine Palestine or something like that, and you'll get some very interesting thing. Karen, is it Karen Armstrong? I got that wrong.
Ben Armstrong, yeah.
No, not the Karen
No,
Armstrong
okay,
who
sorry.
does who's the theologian. There's
Mhm,
a lady who did a lot of work on mosaics
okay.
in the Holy Land, and she's written
Mhm,
some bits and pieces. A guy called Thompson. Um, there's a range of scholars who've been dipping into this area.
mhm.
But the interesting thing, and I think the next 10 years is going to, I think something really important could happen
Yeah.
because international scholarship has begun to reevaluate this Byzantine period. The last 20 years, Byzantium as an empire of diverse centers and this sort of stuff has really taken off. People like
Mhm,
Averil Cameron, people like that, written some very
mhm,
good stuff about Byzantium as a continuous entity.
mhm, mhm,
So
mhm.
maybe the next sort of 10 years we'll see somebody seize the horns and say, let's do a proper academic. It needs an academic to do it.
Yeah.
Somebody with that training and that the backup of a university to actually give you the resources to dig into all this material and open doors.
And perhaps too, we need a different terminology. Immediately, one thing is Byzantium. People say, "Oh, Constantinople."
Yeah,
We need another terminology like the Christian East or something like that.
yeah,
The
yeah.
Christian
The Eastern
Levant
Roman
or
Empire.
the Christian Eastern Roman Empire,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, but
yeah,
for our listeners, Byzantium was actually only really used in common parlance about the 19th century.
yeah,
It's the Eastern Roman Empire. That's how it was known. Even the Greeks still living in Constantinople call themselves
yeah,
Romans.
yeah.
Um,
And the Orthodox call themselves Rome
Roman, yeah,
Orthodox,
yeah,
Roman Orthodox.
Roman Orthodox,
It's
yeah,
fascinating. It's
yeah,
still
yeah,
there in the terminology.
yeah.
And of course, Byzantium was an insult, really. It was Western historians talking about the decadence, the plotting, the all
Mm,
that sort of stuff. So there's a real negativity about Byzantium in general in the
yeah,
West,
yeah.
which is just another layer that you've got to dig through to this jewel box of Christian history. But
Yes, yeah. That's wonderful, Ian. Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing this time with us, my Patreon friends. And we look forward to more treasures. All right then. God bless.
bless you, Aidan. Thank you very
Bye
much
bye.
for the invitation. Bye.
Pleasure.